Welcome, listeners, to the eighth episode of Decoding the Profiles in Power, powered by West Ferry Times. We're diving deep into the lives of the most influential political figures of our time, exploring the journeys, struggles, and triumphs that have shaped their leadership.
Absolutely, and today's episode is about a figure whose tenure in British politics was both transformative and controversial. David Cameron, the man who led the country through one of its most tumultuous periods, is often remembered for his role in the Brexit referendum, but his career was about much more than just that.
Right. It's easy to sum him up by one decision, Brexit. But Cameron's story is much more layered. From his time as prime minister to his exit from politics, Cameron's path was filled with high-stakes decisions, personal challenges, and lasting consequences.
And it's not just about politics, it's about family, privilege, and the balance between personal values and public responsibilities. So let's dive into the early life of David Cameron and begin to understand what shaped the man behind the headlines.
David William Donald Cameron was born in 1966 in London into a privileged family. His father, Ian Cameron, was a stockbroker, and his mother, Mary, was the daughter of a successful businessman. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Pimlico, David's early years were marked by comfort and opportunity.
It's hard not to see the influence of his upbringing in his early career. His family's wealth provided him with access to top schools, including the prestigious Eton College, where he met future political figures and leaders. But despite his privileged beginnings, Cameron always had a reputation for being approachable and down-to-earth.
Indeed. And let's not forget his time at Oxford University, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE. At Oxford, Cameron was part of the Bullingdon Club, an exclusive group known for its wealthy, privileged membership and notorious behavior. This period of his life has been controversial, with some critics pointing to his connections and privilege as symbolic of the old boys network that still holds sway in British politics.
But it was at Oxford that Cameron's political ambitions truly began to take shape. He was involved in the Oxford University Conservative Association and later worked as an intern for a Conservative MP. It was clear even then that politics was in his blood.
But Cameron didn't rush into politics. After university, he worked in PR for Carlton Communications, a media company. It was here that he honed his communication skills and learned how to navigate the complex world of public relations, skills that would serve him well in his future career.
David Cameron's political journey truly began when he was elected as the Member of Parliament for Witney in 2001. It wasn't the easiest of beginnings. The Conservatives were still reeling from the loss in the 1997 general election, and many saw the party as being out of touch with the country.
Absolutely. But Cameron brought a fresh perspective. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even within his own party. By 2005, he was elected leader of the Conservative Party. His leadership bid was seen as a turning point. He was young, charismatic, and spoke of the need for the Conservatives to modernize.
Yes, his heir-to-Blair vision sought to position the Conservative Party as a progressive, compassionate alternative to Labour. He championed social issues like climate change and poverty, and even supported same-sex marriage long before it became the norm in British politics.
However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Cameron's leadership style was often criticized as too focused on public relations and media management. There were moments when his decisions appeared overly cautious or driven by what would play well in the media, rather than by clear ideological convictions.
But there's no denying that his approach helped the Conservative Party become more relatable to the public again. By 2010, the Tories were back in power, albeit in a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. Cameron became Prime Minister, marking the beginning of a new era in British politics.
Cameron's time as Prime Minister began with promise. The UK was still reeling from the global financial crisis, and Cameron's government inherited a troubled economy. His response was austerity. His government's fiscal policies focused on cutting public spending in order to reduce the national deficit.
Austerity. That policy was one of the defining features of Cameron's premiership. While some argued that austerity was necessary to restore the economy, others claimed it disproportionately hurt the poorest in society. And of course, austerity became a key point of contention in the years to follow.
Yes, and during his tenure, Cameron also pushed for major reforms in areas like education and healthcare. He oversaw the controversial Health and Social Care Act 2012, which aimed to restructure the NHS, but was criticized for potentially paving the way for privatization.
In foreign policy, Cameron was closely aligned with the U.S., supporting military interventions in Libya and Syria. His decision to intervene in Libya, in particular, has been a subject of intense debate. Some believe it destabilized the region and contributed to the rise of ISIS.
On the other hand, Cameron was instrumental in securing the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act 2013, which legalized same-sex marriage in England and Wales. This was seen as a significant achievement in terms of social progress, and Cameron's support for the measure earned him praise from the LGBTQ+ community.
And then came the defining moment of David Cameron's political career, the Brexit referendum. In 2013, Cameron announced that he would hold a referendum on the UK's membership in the European Union if the Conservative Party won the 2015 election.
The referendum was a gamble, no doubt about it. Cameron believed that the UK would vote to remain in the EU, and he thought it would put an end to the Eurosceptic voices within his own party. But things didn't quite go as planned, did they?
Not at all. The campaign for Brexit was far more divisive than anyone expected. Cameron's decision to campaign for Remain put him at odds with many members of his party, who were pushing for a leave vote. The referendum campaign itself was marked by vitriol, misinformation, and deep divisions.
And when the result came in, Leave won by 51.9% to 48.1%. It was a devastating blow for Cameron. He had staked his entire political legacy on keeping Britain in the EU. Within hours of the result, Cameron announced that he would step down as Prime Minister, acknowledging that the country had chosen a different path.
Cameron's resignation in the wake of the Brexit result was a shock, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. His leadership had been called into question, not only by the results of the referendum, but also by his inability to keep his party unified on such a crucial issue.
Indeed, many felt that his decision to hold the referendum was a miscalculation, a political move aimed at placating the Eurosceptic wing of his party, but one that backfired spectacularly. Cameron left office, and the country was left to deal with the aftermath.
In the years that followed, Cameron largely retreated from the public eye. However, he has continued to write and speak about the events of his career. His 2019 memoir, For the Record, offers a candid look at his time in office, including his thoughts on Brexit, the referendum, and his legacy.
It's worth noting that Cameron's post-premiership has been far from quiet. He has faced criticism over his links to the Greenwich Group, a lobbying firm, and his involvement in various business ventures. Some believe that Cameron's post-political career shows how the revolving door between politics and business can be problematic.
As we look at David Cameron's legacy, it's clear that his time as Prime Minister has been both praised and heavily criticized. One of the most significant criticisms was his decision to hold the Brexit referendum. While he believed that it would settle the question of the UK's EU membership once and for all, the result has instead led to deep divisions within the country.
Ah, yes, the Brexit decision. Many argue that by calling the referendum, Cameron opened a Pandora's box of political chaos. He underestimated the power of the Eurosceptic sentiment within the country, as well as the risks involved in giving the public such a monumental choice. After all, as we saw, it wasn't just about voting on EU membership. It was about Britain's identity and its place in the world.
Exactly. And while some praise his leadership for tackling the EU issue head-on, others see it as a huge gamble that destabilized British politics. The aftermath of the referendum, with its consequences still being felt today, is one of the most enduring aspects of Cameron's legacy.
Not only that, but his austerity policies, which dominated much of his time in office, also received significant criticism. Though they were aimed at reducing the national deficit, austerity measures led to cuts in public services, which hit the most vulnerable in society. Many felt that his government didn't do enough to protect those who were already struggling.
Right, austerity has left a lasting mark. While the economy did improve during his tenure, the cost was high for the public sector, healthcare, and welfare programs. It's one of those policies that still sparks fierce debate, Did it work, or was it too harsh? The public perception remains divided.
Indeed. And when it comes to his foreign policy, Cameron's decisions also raised eyebrows. His intervention in Libya, for example, has been heavily criticized. While he aimed to prevent a humanitarian disaster, the fallout from that intervention contributed to the instability in the region and the rise of groups like ISIS. It was a classic case of unintended consequences.
Yes, his foreign interventions didn't always have the outcomes he hoped for. But at the same time, Cameron was a leader who sought to improve Britain's standing on the global stage. His decision to back the intervention in Libya was done with the intention of protecting civilians, but the long-term consequences of that action have been debated ever since.
In addition, his handling of the migration crisis in Europe also became a point of contention. Cameron faced pressure from both sides, on one hand wanting to maintain the UK's image as a compassionate country, and on the other wanting to protect national interests. His policies often seemed like a balancing act, and many felt he didn't take a firm enough stance on the issue.
Immigration, the issue that's been at the heart of so much political debate, especially in the years following the Brexit vote. While Cameron attempted to address the concerns over immigration, critics argue that his government did not do enough to reform immigration policy in a way that would satisfy the growing public discontent. This, too, left a mark on his leadership and his legacy.
On the other hand, Cameron did leave a positive legacy in certain areas. His support for same-sex marriage, for example, was a landmark moment in British politics. It was one of the few instances where Cameron took a bold, progressive stance, especially within his party, where there was considerable opposition to the idea. The Marriage for Same-Sex Couples Act 2013 was a significant achievement for LGBT rights in the UK.
Yes, absolutely. That was one of the shining moments of his premiership. Cameron's willingness to support equal rights for all citizens, despite opposition from within his own party, showed a side of him that many people admired. It wasn't just a political move, it was about principle, and for that he earned the respect of many.
Indeed, Cameron's legacy is a complex one. There's no denying that he faced immense challenges during his time in office, from economic austerity to international crises. But in the end, his career will likely be defined by Brexit and how that decision reverberated through British politics and beyond.
In the end, his legacy will probably always be tied to that fateful decision to call the referendum and gamble with the future of the country. It was a bold move, but it didn't go as he expected. Despite his many accomplishments, Brexit remains the defining chapter of his political story.
And yet, perhaps the greatest lesson of Cameron's career is how unpredictable and unforgiving politics can be. No matter how well a leader may think they're preparing, one decision can alter the course of history. For David Cameron, that decision was Brexit.
And so, we reach the end of our episode on David Cameron, a man who rose to the highest office in British politics, only to see his career unravel in the wake of the Brexit vote. His story is one of ambition, power, and ultimately, the consequences of political decisions.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us next time as we dive deeper into the stories that shaped our world. Until then, stay curious and take care.
Absolutely. And don't forget to stay tuned with West Ferry Times. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel and share it with your friends and family. Let's keep the conversation going.